Salam world! I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and today we're going to be talking about the legacy of the Prince of Egypt, Joseph, the King of Dreams. Now, I've only watched this movie once in my entire life, and I was very, very young. So I'm practically walking into this one blind. The only expectations that I had are those that I formed from watching The Prince of Egypt. So not particularly accurate to the source material, but some great characters, great animation, and peak music. However, in saying that, story-wise, I have very high expectations because the story of Joseph or Yusuf alayhi salam is so rich and it hits different in the feels. Now, in the Bible, the story of Joseph is part of Genesis, but in the Quran, there's an entire chapter dedicated to the story called Surat Yusuf, aka Chapter of Joseph. So I'm very familiar with the story, particularly the Quranic one. Now, I recognize that there are differences between the biblical and the Quranic account, mostly owing to the emphasis on details. Like in the Bible, it also looks at the life in Canaan when Joseph is in Egypt, whereas in the Quran, it doesn't do that. And in the Quran, there is a lot more about what Joseph did in Egypt before he was put into prison, which isn't really emphasized on in the Bible. I think the best way that I can explain the differences between the two is the structure of the text. After the creation of the world, Genesis focuses on giving an account of the peoples and prophets from the start of time all the way to Moses. So the story of Joseph is just part of the bigger historical picture the Bible is telling. It doesn't aim to show us differences in perspective of particular events or even focus on main characters. Instead, it's a log of all the events which took place to the descendants of Abraham, which Joseph is. The Quran, on the other hand, wants us to focus purely on the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, his challenges, his perspective, and the perspective of those in his life. It tells a tale with emotions and morals, but it's not in a particular order or pacing. Like, there are events in Joseph's life which warrant multiple pages, whereas others that only get a few lines. And in all honesty, this difference in presentation made it difficult for me to recognize the characters of Joseph and Jacob when I read it, because the emotions that I was sensing from the biblical story were very different from those given in the Quran. But I was glad to find that many of the key events were very similar, so it didn't feel too foreign to me. To add, this movie isn't the first cinematic version of the story that I've watched. Well, technically yes, but given that I don't remember it, it doesn't actually count. There is this 2008 Persian drama which became popular in the 2010s. And this Persian drama spins its own flair and stories which remove it from its original source material, making it historically inaccurate. And so now we get to the fourth depiction of the story that I've seen. DreamWorks' Joseph, King of Dreams. Now, if you're only here for the movie review, you can click forward to the time shown on the screen right now or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk stories. So this film tells the story of a spoiled young boy, the 11th of 12 siblings with a superpower to interpret dreams. Now, as a kid, he didn't know how to unlock his superpowers or use it, but he had a mentor, his father, which would give him one-on-one teachings to master his skill. For his ordinary 10 elder siblings, they saw this as favoritism and wifeism on their father's behalf. None of them shared the same mother with Joseph, and none of them were given Joseph's level of education, so they kind of just put two and two together. To ease their troubles, they decided to get rid of him. First by throwing him into a pit, then selling him as a slave to Egypt. Fortunately for Joseph, his education came in handy, and he becomes the head servant at the house of the royal advisor Potiphar. Unfortunately for Joseph, his good looks made Potiphar's wife want him, and when he said no, he got put into prison. But luckily, he had enough training and trauma to unlock his secret ability. And so he interprets the dream of two of the king's men which were in jail with him. And what he says comes true. So when the Pharaoh had dreams that no one could interpret, Joseph's ex-roommate in prison, as well as his ex-employer, gave him a really good reference. So good, in fact, it got him out of prison. And his superpower got him the top position in all of Egypt, keeper of the land. And with great power comes great responsibility. With 7 years of drought looming in the future, Joseph harvests a fifth of all the grains in Egypt to get the people through. And it works. So well, in fact, that neighboring countries heard, including Canaan. So one day he's just enjoying his day with his new fam when his 10 brothers, which sold him into slavery, show up at his front doorstep.
Here you go.
Now that's what I call a mood changer. But eventually Joseph becomes the bigger person, forgives his siblings, and invites them and their families to come live in Egypt, happily ever after. Now, just as The Prince of Egypt did, the movie admits that artistic and historical licenses have taken place. But, in essence, this movie is an adaptation of part of Genesis, which dictates the life of the prophet Joseph. Now, in the Bible, Joseph's story starts when he's 14 years old. He was looking after a flock with his brothers, and he would report everything to his father. On the off days that his brothers would be fooling around, he would also report it, and so get his brothers into trouble. Now, the Bible says that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. But I really didn't get that reason, because Joseph isn't the youngest child. His brother Benjamin is. So if it were up to the age that Jacob was when his child was born, then Benjamin takes the cake in that category. In the movie, the first musical sequence indicates the circumstances of Joseph's birth.
You were born and fortune smiled, for you are a miracle child.
His mother Rachel was barren, so Joseph was a miracle. Now, this is plausible, but Genesis doesn't really indicate much excitement to Joseph's birth. It feels more like an afterthought. Leah, Rachel's sister and also Jacob's wife, had given him 6 sons and a daughter before Rachel was ever blessed with one. In the Quran, Joseph wasn't treated differently from his brothers until he had the dream. Yes, the dream sequence. Okay, is this the second dream? Let's go back to Van Gogh. Now, I really like the animation for Joseph's Dream. They're given like this post-impressionism Van Gogh flair. Now, in the Bible, and so in the movie, Joseph has 2 dreams, whereas in the Quran, there's only the one dream. But even with that, the dreams in the movie don't match up with the dreams in the Bible. Instead, Dream 2 is the combination of the two separate dreams mentioned in Genesis, one with the bowing wheat and the other with the stars, moon, and the sun. In the Quran, only the latter dream is mentioned. In the Quran, it is this dream that puts Joseph apart from his brothers, not any fancy coat. This is because Jacob interprets the dream as a sign that Joseph is destined for A, leadership, and B, prophethood, and thus requires the necessary education to be able to one day make those two things come true. However, affection-wise, Jacob didn't separate between any of his children. And it's this additional education which was perceived as favoritism and extra attention by his brothers, which ultimately led them down this path of jealousy and spite. The movie really tries to justify Joseph's siblings' jealousy of him by making Joseph an ununderstanding, insufferable teen. And on the other side, it makes Jacob this overprotective, accusatory father, with Rachel stepping in and being the peacemaker between the two sides. But this likely never happened, because one, Rachel passed after the birth of Joseph's brother Benjamin, and given the age gap between them, as given by one interpretation of the Bible and the Holy Quran, Rachel would have passed before Joseph was a teen. And two, there is no indication in the scriptures that Joseph had beef with his brothers. It is more one-sided, basically coming from the lack of communication and a lack of understanding. Now, the Quran addresses this lack of communication and the reasoning behind it from Jacob's perspective. But again, just as we saw in The Prince of Egypt, the movie compromises on the characters of Joseph and Jacob in order to build an emotional and somewhat down-to-earth story by pitching the issue as family drama. And we will continue to see flaws in Jacob and Joseph's characters throughout the movie. However, the biggest difference between the Prince of Egypt and the King of Dreams is that these character flaws are not made up by the movie, but actually come from the source material, the Bible. When reading Exodus, I felt Moses' strength and dedication to God, which made me feel like the movie's depiction killed off his character. But in Genesis, honestly, I don't know how Jacob could redeem himself for everything that he's done. From what he did with his brother at the beginning, all the way to him speaking to his sons on his deathbed. It was hard to take in, to say the least. And given Genesis's matter-of-fact tone when delivering these stories, it's difficult to pinpoint Joseph's emotions on different matters, which I guess opens up to the reader's interpretation as they put themselves in Joseph's shoes and explore their own feelings. So I can't blame the production for making Joseph seem angry and vengeful when his brothers come to Egypt. Like imprisoning Simeon, that definitely gives off vengeful vibes. And you could probably guess from my tone and surprise that the Quran presents Jacob and Joseph in very different lights. Jacob didn't hate his sons for their negligence in protecting Joseph, but he knew that they were lying to him because his coat wasn't shredded or torn, which is what a wolf would have done if it had eaten Joseph. He was dismayed by their insistence on a lie. A lie, mind you, that they kept up for at least 20 years. Further, with Joseph, he had forgiven his siblings long ago. So when they came to Egypt, all he cared about was being with them again. But he needed to suss the situation out and make sure it was safe for him to reveal himself. He didn't want their jealousy to bring about the ruin of Egypt with his death or something. I mean, in all accounts of the story, their jealousy and spite is what pushed them over the edge to committing murder, but they couldn't see themselves living with the consequences of such drastic actions. So instead, they threw him into this dry well, and then, for a bit of dosh, they decided to sell him to a caravan headed for Egypt. And just quickly on that note, in the movie, it shows that the Ishmaelites Ishmaelites pulled Joseph out, not his brothers, which is what happens in the Quran, but not the Bible. The Ishmaelites look very cruel and evil in the movie, whereas in the Quran, they pulled him out because they thought that the well had water, and so they wanted to draw some for themselves and their camels. When they were surprised to find that they had discovered a boy, they decided to go and return Joseph to Canaan. But then his brothers intervened just in time and sold Joseph under the guise of a slave so that they can cover their tracks. So, yeah. Now, in truth, I really enjoyed the part of Joseph being in Egypt in the movie. It really highlighted his intelligence, his charisma, and his humility. Three traits which I would definitely associate with Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Did I really need Joseph and Asenath's romantic subplot? No. But I loved his rise to glory nonetheless. I just kind of wish that that bit was a bit longer before Potiphar's wife gets her slimy fingers in the mix and ruins everything. But I also know that not much about this phase of Joseph's life is actually mentioned in the Bible, but there are a lot more juicy details in the Quran. So it just may be my bias speaking on this matter. And then prison. I think this was the saddest depiction of the prison scene that I've ever seen. Because as the Bible says, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look to anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So prison wasn't at all as bad as the movie made it out to look. And Joseph wasn't depressed or desperate. Now, another thing that the movie mellows out is Joseph's significant contribution to Egypt after his release. After he correctly interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and made a suggestion about how to survive the 7 years of drought, he was literally given Egypt on a silver platter. But other than that, it was Joseph's change to agriculture, economy, and people's perception of religion which were his more impressive endeavors. The 7 silos and the in-husk grain preservation technique, purchasing all the grounds of Egypt except for the priest's ground, and then giving 4/5 back to the people, buying cattle and animals in exchange for grain, and then the people and freeing them. Just a list of all of Joseph's successes, which gets us to the finale, the family reunion.
How many of you are there?
There are 12 of us. 10 of us here. At home we have our father and youngest brother.
Very well. Give them
Nothing! 10 foreigners asking for grain. No ties to Egypt. Are you thieves hoping to see where we store our grain? Spies? I don't know what you are, but I don't believe your story.
Yeah, not the happiest reunion, is it? Now, confused as I was with the reaction in the movie, my confusion was not alleviated when going back to the source material. Why would spies be of concern? Well, historically, it was actually the ancient Egyptians who formed the basis of modern espionage. Internal threats of political unrest were deemed as dangerous as external threats to the pharaoh. So he made this network of spy/assassins to make sure that he could keep the order inside. Now, given that there is no exact historical record which matches the events of Genesis, there is no one period that I can match up and say, yes, this is when Joseph was in Egypt. But people always seem to reference the rule of Akhenaten as the possible period for Joseph's rule, as I pointed out in the Prince of Egypt video. So if we look at the political threats that were present during the reign of Akhenaten, then we may have some indication whether espionage was used. And we can see that the Hittite invasion of Syria was of major concern to the pharaoh at this time. Not to mention the unrest in Canaan, which demanded the Pharaoh's attention as well. So spies from Canaan is not an impossibility. But of course, Joseph knew that these weren't spies. They were his brothers. So why the irrational response? The movie would have you believe that this was a situation where his emotions got the better of him. He wanted revenge. But that doesn't match up with the biblical or the Quranic story. Because in the Bible it says, but they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter, and he turned himself away from them and wept. It is almost as though he felt sorry for them. That till that day, more than 20 years later, they still resented him and had not learnt anything from all those years apart. He felt a duty to make them realize of their shortcomings and feel remorseful for what they have done. Not for his sake, for the Bible states, Joseph was well aware that God had sent him before you to preserve life, to preserve prosperity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. However, for their own healing and growth, and for the sake of their relationship with their own father, he needed the truth out. And the method that he picked was?
لقد أخبرني بكل شيء بصوته هذا.
Nah, just kidding. That's what I call Persian drama. But basically, he needed his father and his brothers to talk. But they wouldn't be able to talk if their father had his crutch, Benjamin. So Benjamin needed to be out of the picture temporarily, so that a solid heart-to-heart could take place. Jacob, well, in the Quranic account, was actually a reasonable and generous man. So Joseph didn't fear the outcome of this long overdue conversation. It's risky, as at his father's age, the blow of losing Benjamin may cause serious damage. But Joseph had faith in God that all will be well, and so devised a plan to bringing and keeping Benjamin with him in Egypt temporarily. First, he tells his brothers that each man can only be given enough grain for his immediate family. So, if Benjamin wanted some, he'll have to come and get it for himself. Then he would guilt trip them, basically forcing his brothers to come back to Egypt anyways, by secretly returning their money to them, and also in the Bible and movie, keeping one of his brothers hostage, Simeon. So then, when they did return back to Egypt with Benjamin, he planted his chalice into his brother's belongings, making it seem like he's a thief. To which the brothers said that the best punishment for a thief was,
نحن الكنعانيين متى ما قبضنا على سارق مالنا جعلناه عبدا لنا لحولين.
Benjamin. The favored one. I didn't take it! Arrest him!
exactly. And finally, the real reunion occurs.
I will not harm any of you, or our father.
The revenge!
I am your brother, Joseph.
Joseph.
I have so much to tell you, so many questions to ask.
Joseph. Can you ever forgive us?
I already have.
I see him.
There he is! It's him! There he is!
Joseph!
Father! 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 Father!
Joseph. My boy. Your mother prayed this day would come, that we'd all be together again as a family. It's a miracle.
Yes, Father. It is a miracle.
It's so wholesome. Now, the movie doesn't show Joseph's brothers and Jacob making up because in the Bible, it doesn't show it either. So basically, most of my issues with this film come down to the differences between the Quranic and the biblical stories, and not actually the movie itself. In terms of how well the movie adapted the biblical story, well, it's pretty similar, at least from my ignorant point of view. To me, the story of the movie felt warmer than the biblical account, owing to the medium and the added emotion. But I also feel like a lot of Joseph's assets were taken away. I mean, there could have been so many scenes which emphasized Joseph's brilliant mind, and not just these 1-2 throw-about scenes about a field and a cat. And with regards to the emotional responses, I need to emphasize that these are the writers and producers' understanding of Genesis, rather than the way that the characters actually felt historically. At the end of the day, we will always be inferring these from the facts. And I guess I was given the opportunity to be susceptible to another point of view, which allows me to recognize this. But at the end of the day, Jacob and Joseph are my prophets, and it hurts me to see them betrayed as villains or tyrants.
This is how you take charge? I expect you to watch after Joseph, but you abandon my son! My son!
Aren't we your sons too?
For what you have done, you will be punished.
Put it in there.
Stop! Please, let the boy go.
You would sacrifice yourselves for a half-brother who's spoiled by your father? Why? Why should you care if I take him, beat him, make him a slave?
Because at the end of the day, prophets are representatives of God. And if the representative can oppress, be cruel, or unjust, then what does that say about the God who guides them? And personally, I can't accept that. But side note, the female characters be clutching again. So, does this movie have problematic parts? Yes, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere as near problematic as The Prince of Egypt. One reason for that is that it's 20 minutes shorter, so less time to screw something up. Two, there is no depiction of God in this film, so one could go through the whole story not knowing that this is from a religious text. But one can say that this is a family story teaching us about mutual respect, humility, and forgiveness. And finally, Joseph actually has a sense of character. He's a strong kid who knows who he is and sticks to his guns. He doesn't fall to authority, which I think makes him a better example than the betrayal of Moses in The Prince of Egypt. So I basically came out of this movie surprised. It was better than I expected, but my expectations were kinda the floor at this point. The only things that The Prince of Egypt does better are the animations and the OST. Leagues ahead, no comp. So if you're looking for some good music, then this isn't the place. If you're looking at a historically accurate story, then this isn't the place. And if you're looking for an accurate depiction of the Bible, I'm gonna have to hand that to the Christians to answer. But if you are looking for a family movie about love, brotherhood, forgiveness, and courage, we might have something for you. So if you're at all interested in getting a historical review plus the difference between the biblical and Quranic account, then smash that like button. And when we get to 300 likes, I'll get to it. If you're in the mood to watch the original movie, please make sure to use a streaming platform that doesn't support the violation of human rights or the spread of negativity in the world. Share this with anyone you think would be interested, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on next week's Del Toro Quest drop. Be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.